I want to leave the Amish because all we do really is work and sleep, and we're not allowed to really go out and have fun.
She was raised to be silent, to obey, to never question the world she was born into. At just 25 years old, Rosanna Miller did something that most people in her community considered unthinkable. She looked at the only life she had ever known and walked away from it. But here's what makes her story different from every other leaving the Amish story you've heard before. Rosanna didn't just leave a community. She left behind a version of herself that was carefully built, brick by brick, from the moment she was born. Every dress she wore, every word she spoke, every thought she was allowed to have. All of it was decided for her before she ever had a chance to choose. And the secrets she carried out with her, they go deeper than most people realize. People on the outside look at the Amish and see simplicity, peaceful farms, horse-drawn buggies, a quiet life away from the chaos of the modern world. And in some ways, that picture isn't wrong. But there's another side. A side that rarely gets talked about. A side that Rosanna Miller, at 25 years old, finally decided the world deserved to know. What happens behind closed doors in an Amish home? What really goes on during an Amish wedding night? And what does a young woman give up when she chooses freedom over everything she's ever loved? The answers are more surprising than you'd expect. Before we go any further, we want to ask you something. If you had grown up your entire life inside one set of rules, one community, one way of thinking, do you think you would have had the courage to leave? Let us know in the comments below. Because Rosanna's answer to that question took her years to find. This is not just a story about the Amish. This is a story about a girl who was never supposed to have a voice. And what happened when she finally decided to use it. And trust us, the truth she revealed about Amish wedding nights alone will completely change the way you see this community forever. That's where we're starting. Right at the beginning of everything. Rosanna Miller didn't grow up in a house full of choices. From the moment she could walk, her world had borders. Not walls you could see or fences you could touch, but invisible lines that everyone around her understood. Lines that told you what to wear, what to say, how to act, and most importantly, who to be. Her family was deeply rooted in the Old Order Amish community. And when people say Old Order, they mean it. This wasn't a relaxed version of Amish life. This was the strictest, most traditional form of a way of living that hadn't changed much in over 300 years. Her parents weren't cruel. That's important to understand. They loved Rosanna deeply. But their love came wrapped in expectations. Expectations that had been passed down from their parents and their parents before them, going all the way back to a man named Jacob Ammon who started this entire movement in Switzerland back in 1693. Think about that for a second. The rules Rosanna grew up following were older than the United States itself. Every single morning looked the same. She would wake up, put on a plain dress in a muted color, cover her hair with a prayer cap, and begin the work of the day. No mirror to linger in front of. No outfit to pick out. No music playing in the background. Just duty. Just purpose. Just community. School ended after 8th grade. That was it. No high school. No college. No dreams that stretched beyond the farm and the church. According to Amish belief, everything a child needed to know to live a good and faithful life could be taught by the end of 8th grade. Anything beyond that was considered unnecessary, even dangerous. But Rosanna's mind didn't stop growing just because her schooling did. She noticed things. Small things at first. The way outsiders, people the Amish called English, moved through the world differently. The way they laughed freely in public. The way they made choices that nobody else approved or disapproved of. The way they seemed to belong to themselves in a way that Rosanna never quite felt she belonged to herself. And that feeling, that quiet, persistent feeling that something was missing, never went away. But leaving wasn't simple. It was never going to be simple. Because in the Amish world, leaving doesn't just mean packing a bag and walking out the door. It means potentially losing everything. Your family. Your friends. Your entire identity. Every person you have ever loved in your entire life. The community has a practice called shunning. And for someone like Rosanna, the threat of it was very real. What exactly is shunning? And how does it connect to everything that happened next? That answer is coming. But first, we need to talk about the part of Amish life that almost nobody on the outside fully understands. The part that Rosanna herself said changed everything for her. The wedding. And what happens after it. When most people hear the words wedding night, their mind goes to a very specific picture. A fancy hotel room. Rose petals. Champagne. Privacy. Romance. Two people finally alone together after months or years of anticipation. Now forget all of that completely. Because an Amish wedding night looks nothing like what you're imagining. And when Rosanna finally started talking openly about what she had witnessed and experienced growing up, people couldn't believe what they were hearing. Let's start with the wedding itself. Because to understand the wedding night, you have to understand what comes before it. Amish weddings are massive community events. We're talking hundreds of guests. Long ceremonies held entirely in German, a language many of the younger generation understands but rarely speaks outside of church. No flowers chosen from a Pinterest board. No DJ. No dance floor. No wedding cake covered in expensive frosting. Instead, there is food. Mountains of it. Prepared by the women of the community for days in advance. There is singing. Old hymns that echo through barns and farmhouses. There is prayer. And there is the weight of every eye in the community watching two young people make a promise that they are expected to keep for the rest of their lives. By the time evening arrives, the celebration has been going for hours. And here is where everything gets surprising. When the last song fades and the final prayer is spoken, the newly married couple does not disappear into a private suite somewhere. They do not drive away in a car decorated with tin cans and spray paint. There is no grand exit. Instead, they go to the bride's parents' house. And they are not alone there. Family members stay late into the night. Friends linger. Everyone helps clean up after the enormous feast. Dishes are washed. Tables are folded. Floors are swept. And the new husband and wife are expected to be right there in the middle of all of it, working alongside the people who raised them. Privacy is not the priority. Community is. In many cases, the couple doesn't even have their own room that first night. Depending on the size of the family home and how many guests are staying over, the newlyweds might share sleeping space with siblings, relatives, or other guests. Now, before you assume this means Amish couples have no emotional connection on their wedding night, stop right there. Because that assumption misses the entire point. For the Amish, the wedding night is not about physical romance in the way the modern world defines it. It is about something deeper. It is about sitting with the weight of the vows you just made. About looking at the person beside you and understanding that your lives are now permanently woven together. About beginning your new chapter not in isolation, but surrounded by the very people who will support that chapter for decades to come. It is intimate in a completely different way than most people understand intimacy. But here is where it gets even more interesting. The morning after the wedding is not a quiet, slow breakfast for two. Oh no. The celebrations continue. Guests return. Another enormous meal is prepared. More singing. More community. More togetherness. The couple is expected to show up. Smile. Participate. Because in the Amish world, marriage was never just about two people. It was always about the entire community welcoming a new family unit into its fabric. Rosanna watched this happen at weddings throughout her childhood. She knew exactly what was expected of her when her own time came. But something inside her kept asking a question she wasn't supposed to ask. Is this really what I want? And that question, quiet as it was, would eventually become impossible to ignore. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it right now. Because what Rosanna discovered next, and what it cost her to act on it, is the kind of story that stays with you long after the screen goes dark. There is a document that governs every single aspect of Amish life. You won't find it on the internet. You won't find it in a library. It isn't printed in a book that you can order online. It lives inside the community itself, passed down through spoken tradition and quiet enforcement. It's called the Ordnung. And once you understand what the Ordnung actually controls, you'll start to understand why leaving felt both impossible and absolutely necessary for someone like Rosanna. The word Ordnung simply means rules in German. But calling it just a rulebook would be like calling the ocean just a puddle. The Ordnung doesn't just tell you what you can and cannot do. It shapes the entire texture of your daily existence. It decides what you wear when you wake up in the morning. It decides how your house looks. It decides how you travel, how you communicate, how you worship, and how you raise your children. And it is reviewed and enforced twice a year by every baptized member of the community. Here's something that surprises most outsiders. The Ordnung is not identical across all Amish communities. Each church district has its own version. What is acceptable in one community might be completely forbidden in another. This means the experience of being Amish can vary quite a bit depending on exactly where you were born and who your bishop happens to be. But certain things remain consistent almost everywhere. Power line electricity is forbidden. Not because electricity itself is evil, but because connecting to the public power grid means connecting to the outside world. It creates dependency. It opens doors. And open doors, in the Amish worldview, lead to pride, distraction, and spiritual decay. Telephones inside the home are not allowed in most Old Order communities. Cars cannot be owned or driven, though riding in someone else's car is sometimes permitted. Photographs are generally discouraged because a photograph captures your individual face, and individual vanity is considered one of the greatest spiritual dangers a person can face. Even the way clothing is fastened carries meaning. Old Order Amish avoid buttons because buttons were historically considered decorative and therefore prideful. Instead, hooks, eyes, and metal snaps hold garments together. Simple. Functional. Humble. Women's clothing carries its own entire language. The color of a bonnet tells the community whether a woman is single or married. Black means single. White means married. No wedding ring is worn because a ring draws attention to the individual, and drawing attention to yourself is considered a form of pride that the community actively works to suppress. This concept of suppressing individual pride has a name. It's called avoiding Hokmut. And the opposite value, humility and submission, is called Gelassenheit. These two ideas sit at the absolute center of everything Amish life is built around. You are not meant to stand out. You are not meant to promote yourself. You are not meant to want things that pull you away from the group. And for many people born into this life, that framework brings genuine peace and belonging. This is important to acknowledge. Millions of people live within these rules and find them deeply fulfilling. The community is real. The faith is real. The love between families and neighbors is real. But for someone like Rosanna, something about that framework felt like it was slowly taking up all the air in the room. She wasn't rebelling against faith. She wasn't rejecting her family. She was simply becoming aware of a self that the Ordnung didn't have a category for. A self that wanted to ask questions. That wanted to make choices. That wanted to find out who she was when nobody else was deciding that for her. And here's the thing about growing up Amish that most people on the outside completely miss. Leaving is not just a physical act. It is a psychological earthquake. Because everything you have ever been told about the world outside your community has been framed as dangerous. Worldly. Spiritually corrupting. The English world isn't presented as simply different. It is presented as a place where souls get lost. So when a young Amish person starts feeling drawn toward that world, they don't just feel curious. They feel guilty, afraid. Like something might be fundamentally wrong with them for even wanting something different. Rosanna felt all of that. Every single bit of it. But then something happened that made the decision impossible to postpone any longer. There is always a moment. A single point in time where everything before it and everything after it looks completely different. Where you can draw a clear line and say, this is where my old life ended and my new one began. For Rosanna Miller, that moment came quietly. Not with a dramatic argument or a sudden explosion. But with a feeling that had been building for years finally reaching a point where it could no longer be pushed down. She was in her early 20s. Still living inside the community. Still wearing the plain dress and the prayer cap. Still following the rhythms of a life that had been laid out for her before she was old enough to have an opinion about it. But inside, something had shifted permanently. Rosanna had started paying closer attention to the world beyond her community's invisible borders. Not through a phone or a television, because those weren't part of her daily life. But through conversations. Through the rare interactions with outsiders that couldn't be avoided entirely. Through the quiet observations of a young woman whose mind refused to stop asking questions even when everything around her said questions were dangerous. And what she saw on the outside didn't look like the corrupted, soul-destroying world she had been warned about her entire life. It looked like possibility. It looked like people making choices. Real choices. About who to love and how to dress and what to believe and where to go and what kind of life to build. Not choices handed down from a document older than the country itself, but choices that belonged entirely to the person making them. That realization hit Rosanna differently than it hit some others who had walked this same path before her. Because Rosanna wasn't just restless. She was specific about what she wanted. She wanted to succeed. On her own terms. Without someone else's framework determining the ceiling of what was possible for her. According to what she later shared publicly, she didn't want to be defined by the community she came from or limited by its expectations. She wanted to find out what she was actually capable of when the invisible walls came down. So she made a decision that she knew would cost her enormously. She decided to go to Florida. Now that might sound simple. A young woman taking a trip. But in the context of her life, it was nothing short of seismic. Florida represented everything her world was not. It was loud and colorful and fast and completely indifferent to the ordinary. Nobody there would look at the color of her bonnet to determine her marital status. Nobody there would evaluate the fasteners on her clothing for signs of spiritual pride. She would just be a person. A young woman. Figuring things out. But here is where the story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. Because Rosanna didn't arrive in Florida and immediately transform into someone new. Real life doesn't work that way. You can change your location without changing the voice in your head that has been shaped by 20-something years of a very specific way of seeing the world. She carried her upbringing with her. Every value. Every fear. Every moment of warmth and belonging she had ever felt inside the community she left. All of it came along for the ride whether she invited it to or not. And then she met Johnny. Johnny Detweiler. Still Amish. Still uncertain. Still standing at the exact same crossroads Rosanna was navigating, but frozen in a way that she was not. Their connection was immediate and complicated in equal measure. Because falling for someone who is still deeply tied to the world you are trying to leave creates a tension that has no easy resolution. Was Johnny her future? Or was he an anchor pulling her back toward a past she had worked so hard to move beyond? Most of us have been in a situation where love and personal growth seemed to be pulling us in completely opposite directions. Where the heart and the mind couldn't agree on the same answer. Where choosing one thing meant giving something else up entirely. If you've ever felt that kind of tension, Rosanna's next chapter is going to hit closer to home than you expect. Because what happened between her and Johnny didn't follow any script. Not the Amish one. And not the modern one either. Love has a way of arriving at exactly the wrong moment. Or maybe it's always the right moment. Maybe that's the thing about love that nobody can ever fully explain. It doesn't wait for you to have your life figured out. It doesn't check whether you're emotionally ready or financially stable or clear on your identity before it shows up and rearranges everything. For Rosanna, Johnny arrived right in the middle of her unraveling. And that made everything infinitely more complicated. Johnny Detweiler was not a stranger to the tension Rosanna was living inside. He understood the pull in both directions because he felt it too. The warmth and certainty of the community on one side. The wide, terrifying, exciting possibility of the English world on the other. He just hadn't been able to commit to crossing the line the way Rosanna had. Where Rosanna moved with a kind of quiet determination, Johnny hesitated. He asked more questions. He needed more time. He weighed things longer. And in many ways, that hesitation made their relationship more complicated than either of them anticipated. Think about what that dynamic actually looks like in real life. Rosanna had already taken the first steps toward a completely different existence. She had already begun feeling the ground shift beneath her. And now she was in a relationship with someone who wasn't sure he wanted to make that same shift at all. That's not a small thing. That's a fundamental difference in direction. But their connection was stronger than the uncertainty between them. According to what both of them shared publicly, the relationship that developed between Rosanna and Johnny after season 6 of Return to Amish was genuine and deep. It wasn't a storyline manufactured for television. It was two young people navigating something real together. And then everything changed in the most permanent way possible. Rosanna became pregnant. In the outside world, an unmarried couple expecting a baby is news that lands with a mix of emotions. Excitement. Nervousness. A little chaos. But ultimately, it is a personal matter that belongs to the two people involved. In the Amish world, it was something else entirely. Premarital intimacy is one of the most serious violations a community member can commit. It isn't just frowned upon. It is considered a direct contradiction of everything the community stands for. Of the vows made at baptism. Of the commitment to live according to God's will as interpreted through the Ordnung. The criticism that came toward Rosanna and Johnny from within their community was immediate and intense. According to multiple reports and what was documented on the show, the couple faced serious judgment and pressure from people who had known them their entire lives. But here is the part of the story that reveals everything about who Rosanna Miller actually is. She didn't collapse under that pressure. She didn't quietly disappear. She didn't try to hide what was happening or pretend everything was fine to protect her reputation within a community she was already leaving behind. Instead, she stood in the truth of her situation with a kind of steadiness that honestly surprised people who had been watching her journey. Johnny, faced with the reality of becoming a father and the woman he loved choosing a new life with total commitment, finally made his own decision. He chose to leave with her. Fully. Without looking back. On March of 2022, their daughter Clara was born. And in that single moment, two young people who had grown up inside one of the most structured, tradition-bound communities in the entire world became parents in the English world they had chosen together. No prayer caps. No ordnung. No bishop deciding what was appropriate for the next chapter of their lives. Just two people. A new baby. And the terrifying, beautiful weight of complete freedom. But freedom, as Rosanna was about to discover, doesn't automatically come with peace. Because you can leave a community without the community ever fully leaving you. The voices you grew up with don't go silent just because you've crossed a geographical or cultural line. And the question of what she had truly left behind, what it had actually cost her to walk away, was one that Rosanna would spend a long time sitting with. The answer to that question is more emotional than most people expect. There is a particular kind of grief that nobody prepares you for. Not the grief of losing someone to death. Not the grief of a relationship ending badly. But the grief of choosing to walk away from something you love because staying would mean losing yourself. That is the grief Rosanna Miller carried out of her community and into the English world. And it is heavier than most people on the outside ever stop to consider. When people watch shows like Return to Amish, there is a tendency to root for the person leaving. To see their departure as a triumph. A victory over restriction. A brave leap toward something better. And in many ways, it is all of those things. But it is also a loss. A profound, complicated, deeply personal loss that doesn't get talked about enough. Because what Rosanna left behind wasn't just a set of rules. It wasn't just a dress code or a technology restriction or a language spoken in church services. She left behind the only world she had ever known. The only version of belonging she had ever experienced. The faces of people who had been woven into every single memory of her entire childhood. Her parents. Her siblings. The women who taught her how to cook and sew and carry herself with the quiet dignity that the community valued. The neighbors whose farms sat alongside her families. The church members whose voices she had heard singing those old German hymns every other Sunday for her entire life. All of it. Still there. Still continuing without her. The Amish practice of shunning is not universal across all communities, and its intensity varies depending on the specific church district and bishop. But the social separation that comes with leaving is real regardless of how formally it is applied. When you leave, you step outside the circle. And the circle closes behind you. Rosanna has shared publicly that she maintains contact with her family in Pennsylvania. And that detail matters enormously. It tells you something about both her and them. That love, even under the weight of religious difference and community expectation, found a way to remain present. That the bond between a parent and a child proved stronger than the distance created by a completely different way of living. But maintaining that connection is not simple. It requires constant navigation. Every phone call, every visit, every conversation carries the awareness of the gap between two worlds that don't have much common language anymore. And then there is the internal cost. The one that doesn't show up in any documentary footage or television interview. Growing up Amish means growing up with a very specific understanding of who you are, why you are here, and what your life is supposed to look like. That framework, as limiting as it felt to Rosanna, also provided something that the English world doesn't automatically offer. Certainty. In the Amish world, you always knew your place. You always knew what was expected of you. You always knew where you stood in relation to everyone around you. There was comfort in that, even for someone who ultimately couldn't live inside it. The English world offers freedom. But freedom without a framework can feel overwhelming in ways that are genuinely difficult to explain to someone who has always had it. Rosanna stepped out of one of the most structured environments imaginable and into a world that operates almost entirely on individual choice. What to wear, what to believe, what to value, how to spend each day, who to become. For someone who had never been asked to answer those questions for herself, that sudden responsibility is enormous. And yet, she did it anyway. She built a life. With Johnny by her side, no longer in plain clothes, no longer bound by the ordnung, but still carrying the values that good communities tend to instill regardless of their specific rules. Hard work, family loyalty, a sense of responsibility to the people you love. Little Clara grew up with parents who chose their life deliberately, who paid a real price for the freedom to raise her the way they decided was right, who understood, better than most, that nothing worth having ever comes without cost. Most of us will never face a choice as stark as the one Rosanna faced. Most of us were never handed a rulebook at birth that governed every detail of our existence. But most of us do know what it feels like to stand at a crossroads between who we were raised to be and who we actually are. That feeling is universal, even when the circumstances look completely different. And that is exactly why Rosanna's story resonates with people far beyond the small world of Amish documentaries and reality television. But the most surprising part of everything she revealed, it wasn't about the wedding night traditions. It wasn't about the ordnung or the shunning or the clothing rules. It was about what she said when someone finally asked her directly whether she regretted any of it. Her answer was not what anyone expected. People expected her to say she regretted nothing. That's the clean ending everyone wanted. The triumphant conclusion to a story about breaking free. The final line that wraps everything up neatly and sends you home feeling good about the human spirit and the power of individual choice. But Rosanna Miller has never been interested in clean endings. When she finally spoke openly about her journey, about everything she had experienced and witnessed and left behind, her answer was layered in a way that stopped people in their tracks. Because she didn't say she regretted leaving. But she also didn't pretend that leaving had solved everything. That freedom had arrived like a sunrise and burned away every shadow. What she said, in various interviews and through the story she allowed cameras to document, was something far more honest than that. She said she missed things. Not the restrictions. Not the limitations. Not the invisible walls that had made her feel like she was slowly suffocating inside a life that didn't fit her. But the other things. The things that exist inside tight-knit communities that the modern world often struggles to replicate. The feeling of never being alone in a crisis. When something goes wrong in an Amish community, the entire community responds. Someone gets sick, neighbors appear at the door with food before you even have time to ask for help. A barn burns down, and within days an entire new one is raised by hundreds of hands working together without a single invoice changing hands. A family struggles, and the church quietly pools resources to make sure nobody falls through the cracks. That kind of belonging is not something you can download or subscribe to. It is built over generations through proximity and shared sacrifice and a genuine belief that your neighbor's well-being is your personal responsibility. Rosanna grew up inside that. And stepping outside of it meant stepping into a world where that level of communal support simply doesn't exist in the same form. But here is what makes her perspective genuinely remarkable. She doesn't frame this as a reason she should have stayed. She frames it as information, as something the outside world could learn from, as evidence that the Amish, for all the ways their lifestyle looks foreign and restrictive to modern eyes, have figured out something about human connection that the rest of the world is quietly desperate for and increasingly unable to find. And then there's what she revealed about the wedding night traditions specifically. The part that generated the most conversation, the most surprise, the most genuine reconsideration from people who thought they already understood what Amish life looked like. She explained that the wedding night, in its Amish form, is actually one of the most honest expressions of what that community values. There is no performance, no pressure to create a perfect romantic moment that lives up to some standard set by movies and magazines. There is no expectation that two people who have just made the biggest commitment of their lives must immediately transform into a version of romance that looks good from the outside. Instead, there is reality. There is family around you. There is work to be done together. There is the quiet, unglamorous beginning of a shared life that will be built day by day over decades. And Rosanna said something about that which genuinely surprised her audience. She said there was something beautiful in it. Not beautiful in the way a movie wedding night is beautiful, but beautiful in the way that honesty is beautiful, in the way that community is beautiful, in the way that starting your marriage surrounded by every person who loves you, rather than isolated in a hotel room pretending that love exists in a bubble separate from real life, actually makes a kind of profound sense when you sit with it long enough. That doesn't mean she wanted it for herself. She made her choice. She built her life. She is raising Clara in the English world with full intention and without apology. But she wanted people to understand that what she left behind wasn't simply a collection of outdated restrictions. It was a complete worldview. A way of organizing human life around values that the modern world has largely abandoned in the pursuit of individual freedom and personal fulfillment. And both things can be true at the same time. Freedom can be worth choosing. And what you leave behind to claim it can still be worth honoring. That is the truth Rosanna Miller finally told the world at 25. Not a simple truth. Not a comfortable one. But a real one. The kind that only comes from someone who has actually lived on both sides of a line that most people only ever observe from a distance. She didn't leave the Amish world to condemn it. She left it to find herself. And somewhere in that process, she found a more complete understanding of where she came from than she ever could have reached by staying. Clara will grow up knowing both sides of her mother's story. The world her mother was born into and the world her mother chose. And maybe that is the most powerful thing Rosanna Miller has given her daughter. Not a perfect life. Not a simple one. But an honest one. Rosanna Miller's story is not really about the Amish. It is about the universal human experience of standing between who you were made to be and who you actually are. Of loving something and still needing to leave it. Of choosing freedom even when freedom comes with a price tag that nobody warns you about in advance. The Amish wedding night traditions that shocked so many viewers are actually a window into something deeper. A reminder that there are entire ways of organizing human life that look nothing like what most of us know. And that different doesn't automatically mean worse. It just means different. Rosanna walked away from one of the most structured communities on earth and built something new on the other side. She did it imperfectly. She did it honestly. She did it with a man she loved and a daughter she is raising with intention. And she did it without pretending that the world she left behind had nothing worth keeping. That kind of nuance is rare. In a world that loves simple stories with clear villains and obvious heroes, Rosanna offered something more valuable. She offered the truth. The messy, complicated, deeply human truth that most of us spend our entire lives trying to find the courage to tell. If her story made you think about your own life, about the worlds you belong to and the ones you've left behind, or the choices you're still trying to make, drop a comment below. We read every single one. And if you want more stories like this one, stories that go beneath the surface and find the real human experience hiding underneath, the next video on your screen right now is waiting for you. It contains secrets about another community and another young woman's journey that will leave you completely speechless. Don't click away. The next chapter is already queued up. And trust us, you are not ready for what comes next.